Say that again.
If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, what does painstaking mean? Where did that phrase come from?
Full amount of effort.
To the point of pain?
Exhaustion.
Exhaustion.
I feel like it means kind of like persevering.
Like trudging the road of happy destiny? Have to keep going?
Maybe some listeners.
Well, one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is painstaking. Not the word itself, but one of the things that we're talking about is it's a painstaking thing, confession. Getting completely vulnerable and real. I remember telling my sponsor a bunch of stories, and then he would ask me questions, and so I'd tell him more, and he would ask me questions, and I'd tell him more, and then something would break off in my life, and I'd have to tell him another piece, and I became known more and more and more, and it became less hazardous as time went on because he was trustworthy. He didn't use it against me. He didn't belittle me. He didn't make fun of me. He didn't stop loving me. And I remember when I did my 4th step, he said, "That's a painstaking step, writing down." He told me to write down every person that I could remember from my whole life, starting with the first person and ending with the person that I just had a talk to tonight before we met. And so I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, you don't want to miss anybody. And so I started with Mark Hinkle, Robert Cox. They were my friends when I was like 6 or something, and until I was 9. And then brothers and sisters, and everybody went on that list. And he said, don't write anything else, just the names. Stay in the name column, because if you start writing something else, then you'll either get angry or hopeless or hurt or victimized, and then you won't be able to finish the name list. And he was adamant about it. And I thought that was really strange. Why would I have to write them all down when most of them I didn't have resentments with? And then after I got them all written down, and he would ask me questions about those people, I realized that I had a resentment against almost everybody on that list. I was either afraid of them, mad at them, jealous, angry with them. And I was just like really, really surprised that I was so broken. I thought, oh my God, I must be the most broken person on the planet. And maybe I was. But what he was trying to help me with was be completely vulnerable. I'd never been vulnerable one moment in my life. I was the actor almost all the time because I didn't feel good enough. I had a shame base, and I felt like if you were me, you would hide yourself too. And so I pretended like I was better than I was. I pretended like I was smarter than I was. I pretended I knew something. If you were talking about something I knew nothing about, I go, oh yeah. I couldn't tell the truth ever. And I didn't even know I was living it. I didn't even know that I was playing up all the time. I was absolutely shocked to find that I was living in the actor and didn't even know who I was. Had no idea what my identity was or what gifts I had. Confession, as far as what I know now, is agreeing with God. Straight and simple. It's just agreeing with God. He's the truth. He wants me to be who I've been created to be. And he wants me to move in that direction at his expense, at his forgiveness, as his acceptance, at his approval, instead of living for myself. That's what I was created to be. God's kid. Everybody on the planet, I believe now, has been created by God, for God, through God. And if they're redeemed, they'll be redeemed through the blood of Christ. That's his plan. At first in recovery, you just have to start getting real, a little bit at a time, right? Somebody asks you, how many days sober you got? And you tell the truth. Why? Because they were there last night when you said you had 12. That's why. So accountability is right up in your face. And just very few things that you talk about. AA meetings are mostly just about alcohol. some of them especially. They want to keep it that way. They don't want to talk about drugs. They don't want to talk about sex or gambling. They want to keep it pure. And I think it's fear, and they're afraid. They're afraid that somebody's going to ask them some questions that are outside the alcohol realm and then embarrass them because they're not in recovery in every area. And they don't know who they are yet. They don't know what God has planned for them because they haven't asked. God wants a full human when he has a relationship with us. He wants somebody who thinks for themselves, loves themselves, accepts themselves, and wants relationship with God. He doesn't want us acting with him. And yet, as long as we're still the actor, we can't even be real with God. Even though he's fully loved and fully forgiving and fully hopeful and fully joyful, we still can't let down our guard until we go through the process of recognizing who we really are, who we think we are, and letting that truth become his. Complete vulnerability is to tell or make known something wrong or damaging to oneself. To tell or make known something wrong or damaging to oneself. If we don't tell somebody everything, then we are always going to have something to hold back. We're always going to feel like we're hiding. We're always going to feel like we're not completely engaged in any relationship we have. And I didn't know that at all. Now I'm beginning to get it. When I talk to God in the mornings, one of the questions I ask him is there anything in me that's between us? And I don't think that he has anything. I believe that what he says about him loving me completely is absolutely true. And so almost always something will pop up. Oh, you're feeling guilty about watching that show last night instead of praying to me. You only did 2 chapters of scripture last night, and you knew that you were supposed to do 3. You knew that you should spend more and more time soaking in my word than watching TV. And that's in the way. And so I just admit it, and I ask him for forgiveness, and then it's gone. It's like a butterfly that flew off my shoulder now, instead of a weight that I carry around that feels like 80 pounds. When I started recovery, I had 80-pounders all over the place, and I was trying to walk as if I didn't have any weight on me at all. I was trying to pretend that I didn't. I was trying to look like I didn't and act like I didn't, and wanted you to think that I didn't. I wanted to be all together. I was involved in a band, and I pretended so well that the guy that ran that band said one time, he says, "Dave, you got all your SH in one sock." And that meant I had it all together. And I felt, oh, good, fooled one, you know. I remember thinking, I fooled him. Because my marriage was a mess. I didn't know how to be a father. I had 2 kids that screamed all the time and were just kids and ruined everything that I had, unless you screwed it to the ceiling and they couldn't get the ladder. And the actor wasn't working anymore. Alcohol wasn't working anymore. Drugs weren't working anymore. Fame from playing the saxophone wasn't working anymore. I was lying to cops. They were pulling me over pretty regularly. God was giving me every opportunity to admit that I was powerless over alcohol. And I remember my first wife asking me, what are you going to do when you get caught drinking and driving? And I'd had some really close scrapes. And I said, well, save up for a lawyer, I guess. And that was my plan. Because I didn't know there was anything else. I'd been to a recovery meeting and I heard somebody lie in it, and I decided you guys were all liars. And so I went home and I was hopeless. I remember that day feeling hopeless. And I didn't know that what God was going to do was bring me to a place where I had to surrender a little bit. And I remember picking up the phone the first time that I realized that I was going to actually follow through with something that I said I was going to do. And then God took over. And it's pretty incredible to think that he has it all planned, that brings him great joy, and I'm still dragging my toes. if we could just see him and trust him for who he is and what he wants, we could let go so easily. But we have self stuck in here. We look through all of life through this self, this mirror of, is this going to be good for me? Right? And God looks like, there's too many rules. It's not going to be any fun until you try it. So I remember worried about the 4-step, and I remember running the negatives through my head. What's it going to cost? What's it going to hurt? What's going to happen? And I remember if I told my sponsor everything, I'd be embarrassed. I remember worried about being embarrassed. Embarrassment was a huge one for me. Very prideful person, and so I was easily embarrassed. And then feeling self-hatred. If I brought up all the things that I'd done, I would probably hate myself even more than I already did. And I was thinking about suicide when I came in, so pretty harsh on the self-hatred. Admitting dirt, it goes against everything the actor's for, right? The actor pretends he's strong and smart, talented, careful, kind, considerate, Superman. And admitting that I was just full of dirt was going to be really, I thought that people would just be shocked, right? I thought they'd be shocked when I first admitted I was an alcoholic. When the first time I went to a meeting and I admitted it, I thought they would suck the air out of the room, and nobody said a word. Nobody even cared. Finally, he tells the truth. And one of the biggest things was fear. It's dangerous letting somebody really see us for who we are when we're the actor. Once you're vulnerable, it's relief to let somebody in and see us. But when we're packing and we have a whole bunch of stuff, it feels dangerous. I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of betrayal. And I was mostly afraid of shame. Those were the ones I was carrying. And my sponsor, like I said, would ask me lots of questions, and I'm a talkative guy, you can tell. And I would tell him the stories. And most of them were almost true. And I was growing in the honesty part. And yet, when I got all done, and he said, "Is that it?" I talked about everything, every person on the list, all the things that had happened, and there was over 100 people in there. He said, "Is that all?" And I said, "Yes." And then my eyes dropped because I knew that there was some sexual stuff that I hadn't told anybody ever. And I got home after driving. I drove home, and I remember all the way home I was having an argument with myself that I needed to tell Paul that. I needed to tell Paul those last two things. And I was arguing, and I finally got home, and I knew I was going to have to do it. I just knew. I sensed, probably God speaking, that if I told him those two things and left all the rest of it out, it would be better than keep those two things and tell him all the rest of the stuff. I just knew it. I just knew that was going to separate me from this new life that I was being given. And so I called him and I told him those two things, and he listened through the whole thing. It took me a long time to say it. And then he said, I'll never forget, "Dave, you were crying so hard I couldn't tell what you said. Could you say that again?" And after I got done telling him, he said, "Well, thank you." And I did that too. And the weight that I'd been carrying around fell right through the floor. The weight, the falseness, the pretense, the arguing, the self-hatred, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the anger, the codependency, the remorse, all lost its grip. It lost its grip because of truth. It lost its grip. I didn't even understand at that point what had happened. All I know is that I had done something that I didn't regret, and it felt the most relieving thing I'd ever done. It was better than the worst case of diarrhea ever. I felt completely cleaned out. Completely cleaned out. I just couldn't believe it. I remember walking away from that telephone call wondering if my feet were touching the ground. I looked down to actually see. That's how much it worked. The temptation that God's talking about for me in 1 Corinthians 10:13, there hath no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will, with the temptation, also make the way to escape that you may be able to bear it. That temptation for me is to hide. The sin that I thought he was talking about at the beginning is just sin. But what happens when I sin inside? The temptation is to control that and pretend and go back to hiding and not becoming clean. That's the temptation that kills the relationship between me and God. The sin separates me, but the hiding guarantees that I stay separated. And so it's a double bind for me. And for a long, long time, I was so worried about embarrassment that I wouldn't tell on myself right away. And I would get caught in that loop of shame that never lets go. And I would chew and chew and chew and chew on that. I used to like to call my sponsor after I had 72 hours after I used to call them emotional relapses, where I'd stick my fist through a door or call my wife a terrible name or take a walk in the middle of the night because I couldn't stand to hear one more word, or have codependency so good that I couldn't tell anybody the truth. And I would walk away from intimacy. I would walk away from people. I would walk away from love. And I would try to, in my own head, rectify the situation. And after about 3 days, when everything had calmed down and I'd kind of forgiven, maybe didn't forgiven, but I'd at least forgotten how it felt to be ashamed of myself, then I would call my sponsor and tell him how I got out of it. When I didn't get out of it at all I did was put it back in the sack and sew the top up and put it in my backpack and carried it around with me. It wasn't until I met Calvin and a counselor, and then God got those two ganged up on me, that I actually dealt with the shame. The one thing that still had my identity in a grip. The last vestige of darkness. And God was so careful about who he had to be so careful about who he sent, because I would go into a fits of rage if you triggered my shame. Wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
That's my wife. And the relief that I've felt since letting go of shame by telling on it, that's how we get past things, is we tell on ourselves. That's why that question's in the notes tonight. The actor jumps up and tries to pretend that he doesn't have shame, that he doesn't need to deal with it, that he's better than that he's okay, that he knows all the steps, he's done all the steps a bunch of times, he has God, he has forgiveness, he has acceptance, but shame hides. And so when it's the actor living, it's not me, it's the actor. And if you see something in the actor that you like, I know it's not me, so I can't have the approval, I can't have the acceptance, I can't have the peace. I'm just the actor. Until that came true and I started to see that for what it was, I couldn't let go of that. I couldn't let go of the pretend David that was better than me, because I was still ashamed of myself. Brene Brown. I know that some people love her, some people don't know her, some people have heard of her, some people have listened to her. In 10 years of research, shame research, she was trying to figure out what the shame resilient people did to be resilient from shame, because she says everybody has shame. So all people that are resilient from shame carry 4 character traits. And I believe that shame and guilt and fear and pride and hurts and resentments and everything that we struggle with all could go on the same list. 1, they understand it. They understand shame. They understand fear. They understand guilt. They understand rejection. And they recognize what messages and expectations trigger that. They've looked inside themselves. They've taken the steps or something similar to the steps with God's help and approval, and begin to know themselves. They know where the actor stops and the true human lives. And they begin to live in the truth instead of the actor. The second thing, the first thing is they understand and recognize what messages and expectations trigger that. We have expectations. I'm supposed to be better than that. We have triggers. They saw something in me that is unhealthy. 2, they practice critical awareness by reality checking the messages. Is that really true, God? Oh, I knew that wasn't true. Let God be your truth instead of your head be your truth, and you're going to win out a lot better. You can stay out of the actor if you step into God. They practice critical awareness by reality checking the messages and expectations that tell us that being imperfect means being inadequate. We're supposed to accept that we're imperfect, not hide it. So practice critical awareness. I'm not perfect. 3, they reach out and tell their stories with people they trust. Sound familiar, doesn't it? And 4, they speak shame. They speak guilt. They speak fear. They don't hide it. They talk about it. They use the word shame or fear or guilt or resentment or hurt or anger or victimization. They talk about how they're feeling, and they ask for what they need. If we do those 4 things with God, right? You get God, and when God walks in, it's okay to be you're enough. When God walks in and tells you you're okay, you'll feel enough. When you've allowed God to tell you that he loves you, and you've allowed him to convince you that he loves you, you don't have to go be the actor anymore. You don't have to pretend that you have to be perfect anymore. You don't have to hide from your character defects. They never have to have a handle on you ever again. But you need God to tell us. We need God to tell us who we are. We need God to drag us through all the hard places. We need God to give us the painstaking directions of how to go back to the place where you're innocent in front of God, naked and unafraid. And he'll do that with everybody who lets him. Once we have that, even a semblance of that, we begin to want to tell people. And that's what sharing Jesus is for. That's what it's all about. Getting healthy enough so that we have Jesus living in our heart, and then when we go out into the world and talk about life, those people will begin to know that something is different about us. We've dealt with our issues. The actor's in the dirt where he belongs. And they're talking to a true human who isn't perfect, doesn't expect to be perfect, but knows who is and wants to introduce you. That's what this is for. That's what life is for here. Otherwise, as soon as we accepted Christ as a Savior, we wink out into heaven. We're here. We're on a mission. We're forgiven. We're free. And he wants us to tell people about him. And I think that's all I got. Go to your meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Good job.